kangaroo. So in this video, we're going to be looking at two important things: the structure of a root and the structure of a stem. So let's first go into the root. So if we slice open the root, okay, and we look at it from the top. So we slice it open, we look at this root from the top, this is what we see, okay? So we're going to label some of the important structures that you need to know. So the outer part of the root, so the surrounding membrane, is called the epidermis, okay? Now this part here, this whole thick area here, this layer is called the cortex, okay? The cortex. Now, you notice this little circle in the middle of the big circle, right? This little circle here. This is called the endodermis, okay? So this membrane here is called the endodermis. The endodermis surrounds two important things, okay? This brownie structure here is called the xylem. We know the xylem is responsible for carrying our water and minerals that it's absorbed from the root up to the rest of the plant, okay? So that is this brown structure here I drew here, okay? And this blue structure that is not on this image because it would start looking really complicated, this blue structure is surrounding this, this brown structure, and it is called the phloem, right? Now the phloem, just like the xylem, is a little pipe, only the phloem doesn't carry water and minerals from the root like the xylem. It carries glucose, amino acids, and other molecules like that from plants that make them to plants that can't make them and plants that need glucose to survive. Okay, so both of them are little roads that carry different things. Now let's move on to the next part, okay? But before we do that, I want to compare with this diagram that I made here with one that you would see if you look at it with a microscope, okay? So here is a microscope picture, right? Now notice the differences. So we can see, or the similarities, we can see the center part here. The xylem can be seen here, these little circles, okay? So note, this is not one big pipe. This is the area that is made up of many small little xylems, okay? So this area just represents the xylem, but it is not one pipe by itself. It is made up of many small xylems. Do you notice? Okay, so that's one key thing to notice. Now the second thing to notice is around the xylem is these other kinds of cells that are slightly smaller. So you notice the xylem, you can easily see the circles, easily see the xylems. But the surrounding part, the phloem, are smaller. The phloems are smaller. But just like the xylem, the phloem isn't one big pipe. This is made up of many small pipes, many phloems, okay? So bear that in mind. And again, epidermis, endodermis, okay? Fairly straightforward, this one. So now, like I said, we're gonna move on, okay? So we just covered this part. Now we're gonna go to this part. But before I jump to this part, the stem, I wanna show what happens from the root to the stem. Otherwise, when I show you the picture, you might be just give up, okay? Because it looks a bit complicated. So what happens from the root to the stem in the structure change is this. So here we have, right, the root. So let's say this is this area of the root. And you notice this part is the xylem, right? This is the xylem. I didn't put the phloem here because otherwise the picture will start looking really complicated. But if you understand how it works for the xylem, the change from here to here, you will understand the change for the phloem. So if we say this right here, this bottom part is this, okay, the root. As we go up, so we travel up towards the stem, what happens is you notice branching, right? So what happens is the xylem starts to branch, okay? So some of the xylem stuff will go in one direction, some will go branch off in another direction. So instead of staying as one big area with all the xylems in, there's different branching out, okay? They branch out towards the edge of the stem. Instead of being in the center, like they were in the root, they start branching out into different little foci, different little areas around, okay? So do you notice? They branch out like this. So you can imagine the phloems will also branch out like that, because if the xylem starts branching out, the phloems are going to branch out. So you'll notice the phloems will branch out the same way, just like the xylem. Now, what happens then in the center? What is going on here in between all of these different areas that was branching out, because there's a lot of empty space, right? So this is not actually empty space. This space right here is going to be filled with something called pith. Pith is a structural material. So because the root doesn't need to be strong because it is under the ground, it doesn't matter if all of this is in the center because it doesn't need to be strong. But in the stem, it's very important that it's strong, otherwise it will fall over. So that's why this branching out happens, so that all these important vessels or pipes go towards the edge of the stem so that the inside can be filled with solid substance called pith, allowing the stem to be very strong, okay? So now I'm going to show you what the stem looks like. Okay, here's the stem. So you noticed this in here is the pith. Okay, so I'm going to go back and forth here. The pith. This is a space for structure. It is a strong area. So this pith represents everything in between, everything in this empty space. Okay, in the middle. So this space sort of. Now you notice the branching out, right? So it's going to make sense here now. So here is the xylem, this brown part. It branched out many times, right? Does this make sense? The brown part. Now, just like the xylem, I said the phloem would also branch out with the xylem, which it does. This is the blue part. Okay, it's also branched out. Now, again, this is the cortex. So if we go back to this image, this was the cortex. Everything around the xylem and the phloem was the cortex. That's the same here. So the cortex is still everything around the xylem and the phloem. It's just there's less cortex now because the xylem and the phloem branched out many times. Last thing about this little area here is this black part. This black part is called lignin. Lignin is also structural. It's also a little thing that helps the plant be strong, okay? Because it's a root. It's a stem now. Remember, a stem has to be strong compared to a root. Now, all of these combined, so the xylem, the phloem, the lignin, and this white part here is called the vascular cambium. The vascular cambium is a little area of cells that have the potential to become new cells. So this little vascular cambium is like the storage area for new cells to make xylem and phloem. Okay, so it's a storage area. Now all of this, the xylem, the phloem, the vascular cambium, and the lignin is called together something called the vascular bundle. Okay, vascular bundle. So whereas the root had one vascular bundle in the center, the stem has many in the periphery, on the outside of the stem, has many vascular bundles. Now, the last name here is the surrounding membrane. Again, it's just called the epidermis. So you notice there's no endodermis in this one compared to the root one. Now, so I hope this makes sense. If you understand the concept of branching out from here, branching out into the root and why that matters for strength, then that's the important thing you need to know. Now, lastly, let's compare it to a microscope image. So here we have the pith in the center, you see, and then we have these big vessels here. The big ones, remember, is the xylem. And then right next to it, we have this little area here, which is the blue area, which is the phloem. It's much smaller. You can't even see the vessels, but they're much smaller, so it's phloem. And then this last outer part, again, that's the lignin. That's for structure. It's very hard, but you can kind of try to see the vascular cambium. But it's tricky to see on this image. Now, again, the epidermis, right? The epidermis, this is all called the vascular bundle. What else are we missing? Cortex. I say we're missing cortex, and that's about it. Cortex, all this space in between the vascular bundles. So that's it for how the stem and the root looks like and the details you need to know. I guess if this doesn't cover the detail you need to know, then obviously you're going into plants in university or something, and you'll need to find some video that has more detail on this. But this is enough for high school level.